Hello, my name is Keith Wolf. I'm a retired licensed local pastor in the United Methodist Church. Today is November 19th, 2024. A year ago, on this day, my wife of 40 years passed away from frontal temporal and Alzheimer's dementia. That morning, I gave a sermon, having been invited to preach a couple months before. The theme of the sermon series was about death, and I didn't know at the time that I accepted the invitation that my wife would be actively dying. And in fact, after I finished giving the sermon and got to the nursing home, half an hour after I came into her room, she indeed passed away. I decided that I would like to share the sermon that I gave this morning with all of you now. The reading is from Psalm 90, verses 1 to 12 from the New American Standard Bible. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn mortals back into dust, and say, Return, you sons of mankind, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by, or like a watch in the night. You have swept them away like a flood. They fall asleep. In the morning they are like grass that sprouts anew. In the morning it flourishes and sprouts anew. Toward evening it wilts and withers away. For we have been consumed by your anger, and we have been terrified by your wrath. You have placed our guilty deeds before you, our hidden sins in the light of your presence. For all our days have dwindled away in your fury. We have finished our years like a sigh. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or, if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is only trouble and tragedy, for it quickly passes and we disappear. Who understands the power of your anger and your fury according to the fear that is due you? So teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. The title of my sermon is How Many Days Left? How many days left? Christmas is coming. Stop counting the days and start living the moments that God provides. The psalmist says to God, Teach us to number our days that we might present to you a heart of wisdom. The Hebrew word manah, or number here, does not mean to simply count. It means to seriously and intentionally weigh or consider each day and how you will live it, and appreciate the gift of each day, each moment, each second that God gives you. It's not how long we live that matters, the psalmist says. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is only trouble and tragedy. It's having a heart of wisdom for God that matters. And how do we obtain this? We do so by having an open mind, open to what God might be teaching us both in the highs and the lows of life. There are many times when we might revel and take pride in an event, an accomplishment, and attribute it to our own good fortune or hard work, and we fail to acknowledge God's part in it and God's purpose for it. I used to be quite involved with community theater, and I was fortunate to play the lead in several performances. And while I enjoyed the applause and recognition, I didn't really ever think about why I was being given these opportunities, except for my own pleasure. But eventually, over the years, the rehearsals started to feel like drudgery, and the pleasure started to fade. And I wondered why I was still doing it, until someone reminded me that even acting in community theater was a ministry because the performances were providing a vital service to the community, providing entertainment that people looked forward to every year and lifted their spirits. Once I started looking at it in this way, it became nothing to do with my own pride and counting how many standing ovations I received, and it became all about having a heart for God's purposes and how I was able to minister to the community through these opportunities. There are many times in life when we experience darkness, and it seems like God's plans and purposes are a complete mystery, and we cannot understand why God would let certain things happen. During these lows, it is extremely difficult to keep an open mind in order to listen and see with ears and eyes of faith what it is that God might be teaching us. Instead of seeking a heart of wisdom for God, we start dwelling on our misery and wondering, how long will this last? I have experienced my share of these dark times. Back in 2009 and 2010, when I experienced a series of losses that threw me into a deep depression. And then, as recently as November 20th, 2019, when my son was run over by a truck and killed on his bicycle. And for the past 8 years or so, up until today, as my wife has suffered with dementia. And as I mentioned, she was actively dying at the time that I gave this sermon a year ago. So, why am I here today giving this sermon? I asked. How am I able to be here, even? When Pastor Rebecca called me and asked me to preach this series on good news about death, I had no indication that my wife would be actively dying anytime soon. But I believe God has called me to be here in order to share with you some of the things that I have learned through this journey. First, just about everyone I know who has had a loved one with dementia will say that it's hard to understand the purpose in God's plan for this horrible disease that slowly devours the victim's brain over the course of many years. I have asked God this same question over and over, and this is what I think at the moment. Dementia and other sufferings are a part of the totality of our temporary, imperfect, terminal, earthly existence. We're all going to die. Our earthly life, even with all the pain and suffering, is actually a gift from God. It's like a stopgap measure on God's part to give us endless chances to turn from our own selfish desires and choose to be perfected in love with God, who is perfect love. God is love, and love cannot help but share itself. That is its nature. That is God's nature. God created us to love and be loved, but love by its very nature must also be freely given. Thus, we were created with free will. Because we can and do choose not to love God at times, there must be a separation between the perfect divine realm and the imperfect choices we make. And while the suffering may seem to be endless, in the eternal, divine, spiritual realm of God, this life and all its sufferings will be completely wiped away. It will be as if it never happened. Even Jesus, who was God in human form, endured suffering and death in order to show us how to freely choose to live every day of this temporary life in the loving way God intended us to live. Now, that being said, each of the three events I shared before have taught me something that has only added to my heart of wisdom for God. The depression that I went through and came back from in 2009 to 2010 actually prepared me to be a rock for my family in 2019 when my son died without warning. And since my son died, because that is probably the worst thing that could ever happen to me, I no longer get upset about things like I used to, and I've learned to enjoy my days even more. Now, when it comes to my wife's dementia, some of the pearls of wisdom that I have discerned for myself are the following. Number one, I understand that while dementia and all human suffering is part of the total package of this terminal human existence, it is also an opportunity for us to show the world a glimpse of God's beloved kingdom, which can be ours and can be theirs by how we respond to the suffering of others, both those closest to us and to the stranger and the enemy. Respond like Jesus did. Second, Kathy was diagnosed in early 2017. I knew something was wrong even a year before that. And then looking back, I could recognize things that were happening that we attributed to other things, but which were probably early signs. So I tell people that we've been dealing with this going on 9 years now. I want to know when the end is really near so I can be with her. But I've told her that if she goes when I'm not there, that it's okay, because I know the way how to find her. I have to stop trying to predict in my mind how much more time we have. It is a frustrating and futile exercise. Instead, I am trying to simply enjoy her physical presence, seeing her face and eyes, touching her face and hands and hair, giving her kisses and hugs, hearing her moan and mutter, and whispering in her ears, "I love you." I'm trying to learn to cherish the moment rather than worry about what's going to happen next. But it's hard because I have no control. I'm trying to give it all to God, but that is easier said than done. The third thing that I've learned is that I have been worried that I will not be there when Kathy dies. But then I recalled that Jesus wasn't there when his friend Lazarus died. Jesus was going about his Father God's business. So I try to tell myself that it's okay if I'm not there when she dies, if I too try to live according to God's will. The timing of her death is between her and God. If they want me there, God will see to it. Fourth, On day 7, with no food or water, I was thinking perhaps God is keeping her here until he feels we are most ready to move on after she passes. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 5 says, "It is God who has made us ready for this change. He has given us his spirit to show us what he has for us." Fifth, despite how hard it is to wait and to watch her die, I am thankful to God for these moments in which I can still touch her and see her, for I am fully aware that soon the time will come in which that will no longer be possible. 6. Near the end, when she would be gasping for breath and then stop breathing for a time, I would count how long the apnea was lasting to see if it was progressing until I realized that this too was a waste of precious time. And I just started hugging her to make sure she felt safe and secure and comforted. 7. On day 10, with no food or water, her skin was literally breaking down. Her blood was pooling. She's having seizures twice an hour lasting several minutes. And I have been asking myself what she and God are waiting for. People say, oh, she has a strong heart, or she has unfinished business, or she's a fighter, or she wants to hear your voices for as long as she can, or maybe she's waiting till November 20th, the day Alex was taken from her, so that she can reclaim him. I kind of like that idea. But today, I have come to the realization that if I fully trust in God, I do not need to know why this is taking so long. So I will try to fully trust in God. So, in each of the 3 episodes of darkness that I've shared with you, my depression, my son's death, and my wife's dementia, having gone all the way through it with trust that God has a plan and is in charge, and trying to remain awake and aware as to what I can learn, I have been able to come out the other side with joy. Pure, unadulterated joy. Last year during Advent, I led a discussion group based on a YouTube video by Rob Bell entitled An Introduction to Joy. I recommend that you look it up. In his presentation, Rob points out this very truth, that if you can go all the way through the times of darkness, fully embrace it, and not get stuck wallowing in misery and counting your losses, if you can go all the way through it and come out the other side, you will know true joy. Rob's presentation is based on the book of Ecclesiastes. When I read the scripture for today, and especially the part about where it says, "You turn mortals back into dust," I immediately thought of Ecclesiastes and that we all came from the dust and all return to the dust, as it says. There are some lessons to be learned from Ecclesiastes. Number 1 is that life is messy. Bad days are normal, and good days are a gift. Secondly, life confounds our expectations and eludes our control. We are not in control of our days. God holds all days in his hands. 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 22 states, "So I realized there is nothing better for us than to find joy in the godly work we do, for work is its own reward." And 4th, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 18. It is good that you grasp the godly work and do not let the joy slip from your hand. For the one who fears God will end up with both meaningful work and joy. Ecclesiastes begins with the words, "Meaningless, meaningless," says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, the word translated as meaningless in Hebrew is hebel, which literally means vapor. In other words, our lives are like vapor or a mist. Imagine, if you will, a spray bottle with water, and you spray the water, and the droplets of mist immediately vanish. Psalm 90, verse 4 says, "For 1,000 years in your sight, God, are like yesterday when it passes by." So stop trying to count droplets of water in the mist. Stop counting the days and start living the moments that God provides. Just try to enjoy the feeling of the mist on your skin. Just try to accept and learn what God is trying to teach you as you travel through your life that seems like 70, 80, or 1,000 years long to you, but which is truly just the blink of an eye, dust in the wind, vapor in God's vantage point.